As we embark upon Early Autumn by Langston Hughes, I want to start by asking you if you can recall a time where you ran into someone that you hadn't seen in a long time.
I have had that happen before, and it's always amazing. Sarcasm, sarcasm, sarcasm.
Well, and I guess we should also clarify, is it a past lover or is it just like a friend? Because friends can be all over the place, right? Like the ones you don't want to see, the ones you do want to see. But like when you had an intimate relationship, which we infer happened with these two in the story because it said they spent many, many nights together, then something insignificant happened and they split apart. There's I don't know, there's something that happens like in the back of my head, like I can't focus if you just suddenly stumble into them at the grocery store. I've done it like when I was out, like at bars and such. You just, I don't know, like I'm not myself. Like there's like this vibrating in my head and my thoughts aren't straight, if that makes sense.
Sure, I mean, you're reliving emotions that you thought that you had got over maybe, or that had been buried or weren't relevant to you now. I completely understand that. I think that unless it's somebody that you missed but didn't realize you missed, it's almost always awkward, whether it's a love or not a love, because that person was someone specific in that unique position in time, and so were you. And your relationship was unique in time as well. And you've both changed and evolved. And how do you go back to that place in time? You can't.
Sometimes it could be like pent up years of thoughts, or maybe they've still been with you in your thoughts. Like, oh, I want to say this differently this time. Like maybe you're harboring like resentment on some level and you want to do something different perhaps. And especially if it's like spontaneous, you don't know how to like cram those pent up like feelings out in that moment too, because you also have like this mask that you're wearing where you're expected to do the small talk, like, oh, how are you? And there's even like that quote where he's like, you're looking very, he wanted to say old. Well, he said, but she understood. And it's like the things we don't say are more important than the things we say sometimes in these moments.
And there's been a lot of songs written about this and stories that are kind of relevant to this and rom-coms and everything. I think this is very relatable to people, as you might run into somebody that is from your past, specifically a lost love, or maybe not a lost love. And I think that you look at this person and you want to be kind if the relationship maybe ended cordially, but if it didn't, do you feel better about yourself or worse about yourself, almost going on the attack? And I feel like that's what's happening here is I want to be the bigger person and show that I'm better off without them, which is the way that you, quote, win the scenario. And that's what it really feels like, is it's almost this unspoken struggle between these past loves. And it's kind of heartbreaking on top of all of the heartbreak that happened between these two people.
Yeah. Do you think, when you look at how Bill and Mary react to each other, that one of them might be still hung up on the past as opposed to the other?
Yeah, it feels like Hughes wrote it that Bill is the one that is okay with not being in this relationship. And you get that from the very end of the poem, right? Where the son is named after Bill. That's the clincher for me.
I think I texted you when I was just like, dude, that last line, killer, right? Because you knew all the things that were unsaid were suddenly confirmed. You knew all along the way that like Bill smiles politely when he first sees her. And it's like, well, why did Langston Hughes decide to put the word politely there, right? Bill smiled, right? That could mean a lot of different things. He could actually have been happy to see her. He could have been planning something sadistically, like to get back at her, right? Like there's so many different ways you could take smiled. But the fact that he put smiled politely meant, oh, he didn't actually feel this. He was doing it for the mask, like we talked about a second ago. And then Mary constantly is just like, oh, right? And the fact that this whole time they're under this time pressure because they're at the bus stop, right? Like this conversation ain't going on for longer than 5 minutes max, right? So they almost like need to get through this mask, this politeness of like, oh, you should come over for dinner sometime. Like, oh, it's great. I have 2 kids. Oh, you live here now. to get through that and to get to the meat of what you really want to say, it's not going to happen in 5 minutes, especially between these two who obviously have shared a past.
And I think it comes back to what we've talked about a lot of why we love certain authors. Hughes here has given us details. Details matter. The things that are said matter, but as you pointed out, the things that are admitted also allow us to draw certain conclusions. And I think that if you look at the things that Bill says and Mary does not, you see this story unraveling of longing and regret and loss that seems a little lopsided in the story, at least how I took it.
Mm-hmm. Here's one thing that kind of stuck out to me, and I never came to a really good conclusion, and I'm curious if you did. I'm going to say the word aging, and I'm going to bring up a couple of quotes here because just in case anyone watching also didn't pick up on this, here's some things. And I want to get your reaction, because whenever an author opens with something and closes with something and also includes it in the middle, I always feel like we're supposed to hone in on it. Okay. And if you noticed, one of the opening statements was when he was very young, they had been in love. All right. So we open up with young. And if, as you've already stated, one of the last lines was when she talks about her kids, like Mary names her youngest son, Bill. And I want to know how many kids she had and how many of them are named after other lovers, because one, it's either a pattern, or two, she had this one banked for some time. Like she was married to this guy, having multiple kids at least, because the youngest, she banked that one for Bill, the one that got away. And I think that's interesting. But there's actually a couple of quotes that bring up age earlier in the story too. There's this quote where he says, he stopped, but at first he did not recognize her. To him, she looked so old. And a little bit later, you're looking he wanted to say old. Well, he said. And then this is what's kind of like telling to me is this is her view. She had been older than he was in Ohio. Now she was not young any longer at all. Not young. But Bill was still young. So I'm kind of curious, like, first of all, did you have a take on what's with this perception of age and time in the story?
So a couple of things. First, I want to go back to the names of the kids. First, my mind went to, oh, is it his? I'm like, no. If it was the oldest child, it maybe was his, and we got some scandalous stuff going on here. And I thought that would have been an interesting way to write the story as well. But it's the youngest one, so irrelevant. But it was a thought that popped in my brain when I was reading it. To your point, is I think it is this kind of old adage that women, as they age, it's something that's looked negatively upon. And when men age, it's something that is revered. And I think that's something that's been in our culture for, the longest time. And we see this in movies and shows and stories and everything, of that men are allowed to age and women have to stay young forever. Otherwise, they lose something of their womenness. And I think that Hughes is just kind of pointing out, old kind of, adage that, this is how some men look upon women, is that all they're defined by is their beauty. And that's kind of heartbreaking.
Okay. I will say I had none of that. Not saying you're wrong, right? This is a channel where we get together and discuss how we take away things. For those of you that are new here, welcome. At 10 minutes into the video. but here's where I take this one. I feel like one of them stuck in the past, right? Like Mary, or at least mentally she's stuck in the past, because she almost, I think, like has captured this moment in time with who Bill was. And we talked about this before, that when you meet someone on a particular day, you marry them on a particular day, but that's not who they're going to be the rest of their lives. They're going to change, right? And it's like almost like Mary still sees Bill as who Bill was when they were younger, right? She's changed. She's moved on. She sees her progress, but like she's almost like encapsulated Bill in a particular moment. He's still like that young one. And I think to me that kind of symbolized how she was still kind of romanticizing the past, like idolizing it in some regards for when she met Bill is how I interpreted it.
And that's fair. And I think that that's important. I guess my thing is that we fill in the gaps with our own biases, and maybe that was mine of thinking of like, wow, like maybe Bill looked like crap too, you know? He could have looked haggard, you know, and perception is important, you know, of does the gray look distinguished or does it look old?
Okay, well, let's talk about that graying hair, right? Because you and I have been talking about that a lot. The name of the story is Early Autumn. What do you think? So for me, also, even when you take in the bus stop, right? The fleeting, you know, things are going to change sort of thing. Autumn is, tell me what you think the title means.
I was trying to come up with some funny thing of saying of like, oh, you know, she was falling for Bill again. You know, falling leaves, da da da. I'll be here all week. Tip your waitress. I don't know. I think that it's a time of change. If it had been something spring, then maybe it was a renewal, growth, rebirth, but it's not. This is when things aren't quite dead, but they're dying, right? Things are falling from the trees. Things are leaving the realm of life. So I think that it's the slow death of their relationship is finally realized at this point in time.
Yeah, I could see that. I definitely got the hints of like a fleeting time, you know what I mean? With particularly now, because this is a very timely comment, but right now we're in the middle of like this drought as fall's hitting. So like they're saying that fall, like with the leaves changing, is going to be like days. It's not even going to be months. It's maybe a week. Like the leaves are going to turn so fast because all the trees just don't have any water. But it reminds you about how quick that beauty can be to the relationship, how quick the beauty of that relationship was. And then it fell away, not because of something important, not because of some earth-shattering thing, because something insignificant happened. And that's another thing that I think we can all relate on is that moment, right? That insignificant thing. Could I have handled things differently so that we hadn't gone through fall so quick, perhaps?
Insignificant to whom? I think it is one thing that I kept coming back to as well, because obviously they have two very different perspectives then and probably now. And I'm filling in the gaps, obviously, with my own relatability of what I've lived through my own life. But I don't know, like what is insignificant to one could be significant to another.
Well, I know Langston Hughes is surely not supposed to be making us guess at what happened, but you know there's other readers out there that do that too. The fact that she remarried real fast, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that he was burned by women for quite some time. He scorned. I can't remember the exact words, but he was kind of like mad at women, I think was something there in the narrative in the beginning. It kind of made me wonder whether one of them, like this whole age thing, like one of them had like fallen for something like someone older, but that wouldn't be insignificant as part of the problem. But I think we're not supposed to speculate, but I do think that it's, to your point, it's rather interesting that she chose to move on, almost like not cope with that magical event, hence why she's probably still wrestling with it, naming her kids after him. And I think he wrestled with it, right? Like he began to hate women for a while. I think he went through his grieving, whatever that insignificant loss thing was that caused him to have a big loss, like the loss of a lover, essentially. I think he went through that process and was able to move on healthily, like as we could see later in the story. And she moved on quickly. She covered it up with another relationship, and you can see she's never come to terms with those feelings. And this is what I love about this story, captures that moment where I think she's finally being forced to relive some of those feelings.
Relationships are complicated, and in such a short story, it's incredible that Hughes is able to cram in so much character and background to these two people that have such a deep relationship and meant so much to each other at some point in time. It's pretty amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. Good stuff.
It's a great story. You know, we've talked in the past how literature can be doors, mirrors, and windows, right? Doors inviting people to change, windows to see someone else's life, and mirrors to reflect your own life. And I think this is one of those mirrors for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like we've seen these moments, we've lived these moments that we're like, oh, I get it. And for that reason, I think this one, I really connected with. Langston Hughes is a fantastic writer. We'll leave a playlist of all of our talks that we've had of him before because we love talking and discussing Hughes. Let us know what other Langston Hughes stories we should cover next. Thank you for spending time with us today. My name's Ben Una. Peace.
Peace.